Welcome to the Practical Dermatology Podcast. This month, we have an interview with Dr. Harrison Nguyen, a conversation between Dr. Neal Bhatia and Dr. Mark Lebwohl, and the latest news from around dermatology. Now, here's Practical Dermatology's Jason Mazda.
I'm Jason Mazda. I'm here with Dr. Harrison Nguyen, who has a new top line to his bio. So, Dr. Nguyen, thank you for joining us, and I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Jason, for having me. My name is Harrison Nguyen. I'm a dermatologist and clinical researcher in Houston, Texas. I'm manage and direct a practice and clinical research center here called Harrison Dermatology and Research Group. But I'm also a clinical assistant professor at the University of Houston College of Medicine and just received an appointment at my alma mater, the Baylor College of Medicine in the Department of Dermatology. So it's been a tremendous honor and look forward to giving back to the institution that really shaped the foundation of my career.
Well, big congrats on that. So, what I want to talk to you about today is we talk a lot about the great therapeutics available for psoriasis now, but there are some barriers as far as getting the most out of these options. And I know that you're passionate about taking on two of these barriers in particular, one of them being diversity in clinical trials. What needs to be done to get clinical trials for psoriasis to the point where all patient demographics are getting the most out of the latest advances?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. This is a really important gap in the field of dermatology, and it applies to psoriasis, but to all our clinical trials and understanding of diseases. It's important for us that when we do clinical trials, that we have appropriate representation of our entire population in these trials. And historically, our trials have had a big underrepresentation, especially of patients with skin of color. And as you know, as listeners know, skin diseases affect patients of different skin types differently. They manifest differently, they respond differently, they heal differently, right? And so it's really important that that companies and researchers are mindful of this gap and are proactive to make sure that when we're enrolling and we are designing clinical trials, that we have representation across the spectrum from our patients. And so you mentioned a couple recent changes, and there was there has been some regulatory guidance from the FDA historically, at least in the last 5 to 10 years, that clinical trials must enroll more patients of diverse backgrounds, so specifically patients of Black and Latino origin. But that rule has been lifted in the last year, and there's been a lot of changes from a regulatory standpoint for the FDA. But one of those that has impacted clinical trials is that there's no longer guidance for enrolling and studying diverse populations. And so now the onus is really on us as researchers and on those who sponsor the trials, whether it's companies, whether it's on NIH, to really demand a diverse representation of study subjects, right? And so the goal of a trial is to be able to take an insight or take data points and extrapolate that to our clinical practice to understand how intervention or a medication can impact the population. But if we have a very narrow population, a very narrow study, that data, those results are not broadly applicable. And so again, I think one take-home point is that we really need to take the onus is on us to be able to enroll and study medications across the entire population. A second thing that I'd like to bring up specifically in psoriasis trials is that historically, the definition of moderate to severe psoriasis has been restricted to a BSA, a body surface area, right? It's been greater than 10% BSA, what the FDA has called as moderate to severe psoriasis. But what we know is that the impact of psoriasis is far beyond just a BSA number. It can include involvement of high impact site areas or specialty site areas, which include the face, the groin, intertriginous areas, the hands and the feet, the nails. These areas, even if they have a low BSA, they can really tremendously impact the patient. And even beyond that, some of these sites, such as the nails and the scalp, can be harbingers for systemic inflammation. They can be harbingers for the development of psoriatic arthritis. Nail psoriasis, 3 times the risk. Scalp psoriasis, 4 times the risk of developing psoriatic arthritis. And so this is really representative of the fact that psoriasis is a systemic inflammatory condition and that we need to be able to have access to systemic treatments beyond just a BSA. And the final point here is that the FDA has, because they have restricted the definition of moderate to severe BSA psoriasis as a BSA percentage, when companies have tried to seek approval for patients beyond just the BSA percentage, the FDA has given a lot of pushback. And what we know is that biologics, not only they're very effective, but they also have a very favorable safety profile, especially the ones that have come out in the last decade. And so we really need access for our patients across the spectrum to systemic treatments beyond just a BSA percentage for our patients.
Okay. And that gets into the next one that I wanted to ask you about is when we're talking about prior auths being a big barrier, like you're talking about exactly. I know you've talked about advocacy. What specifically, what can some of our listeners out there maybe do to affect change as far as legislative action to make some of these systemic therapies more, I guess, more readily available to patients who really need them rather than third-party payers dictating who they're available to and who they're not.
Yeah, this whole concept of prior authorization it's reflective of the growing administrative burden on clinicians and on practices for providing access to treatments for our patients. It's before we discuss some things that clinicians can do, I'd just like to touch upon the concept of a formulary, the concept of prior authorization, and remind the audience that formularies and prior auths are not necessarily designed based on clinical data. They're not necessarily designed based on safety and efficacy, but often they're designed based on financial considerations such as rebate payments, right? So a PBM or a pharmacy benefit manager designs the formulary on behalf of an insurer and often will provide preferred placement for treatments based on rebates, based on how much they're being paid to place a medication higher on the formulary. And as such, they have created hurdles and steps and processes for us to go through in order to navigate this process. I think the truth of the matter is that these processes are put in place to create more hassles in hope of uh, potentially deterring the prescription of a medication that is not perhaps not as financially lucrative for these PBMs. And so, obviously this could be a discussion that we can talk about for hours on end, but there's tremendous hurdles and problems in the drug pricing supply chain, and the burden has been put on us as clinicians. It's been put on patients, and ultimately it's the patients that suffer. And so, advocacy is hugely important. We need to continue to advocate as a field, as dermatology clinicians, on behalf of our patients, so that legislators can understand the burden that these prior auths and these other steps place on us and on patients. Remember, they're not based in safety and efficacy data, but they're based in financial considerations. And reform is already underway. In the last 5 years, we've already seen some PBM reform happen at the federal and the state level. And so I am optimistic that change is happening, but it really started with advocacy. It started with shedding light on this matter, and the louder that we continue to be to advocate on behalf of our field and on our patients, the more successful we'll be.
Very nice. So is it a matter of contact your representatives, or is there anything else specific that you would suggest that people do?
Yeah, we all know that that there's only so many hours in a day, and everyone has varying bandwidth that they can really devote to this matter. I think on a very basic level, making sure that you're part of our societies. The AAD, for example, has a huge arm with advocacy and helping support the initiatives that are important to to dermatologists and to patients. But a letter to your representative, a letter to different politicians can be very helpful. Helping donate to organizations like the Skin Pact that advocates on these issues as a whole. Of course, we have some days that are dedicated that dermatologists can join, where they can join on the Hill on the Advocacy Day at least once a year, where they can go meet with their state representative and discuss some of these issues. When we talk with politicians, it's been surprising to me how perhaps how little they're aware of some of the issues that we go through. And so I think sometimes it's easy to feel like, as one person, we can't make a difference, but realize collectively our voice can really make change. And so any help that our listeners can provide, whether it's just supporting the local, state, national professional societies, or getting involved in some of these initiatives, are really impactful.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Nguyen. I enjoy following your LinkedIn page, listening to you on some other podcasts, reading some of the things that you've done, and the passion that you have about some of these issues. So getting to talk to you about them directly was really a pleasure. So thank you for joining us.
It's really my pleasure. Thank you so much, Jason. Appreciate you having me on.
Next, Dr. Neal Bhatia is joined by Dr. Mark Lebwohl.
Hi, this is Dr. Neal Bhatia. I'm Chief Medical Editor of Practical Dermatology, and welcome to the podcast with one of my mentors, good friends, and titans of the specialty, Dr. Mark Lebwohl. Dr. Lebwohl, as you know, he's Dean of Clinical Research at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City. I don't think there's anything Dr. Lebwohl hasn't done, which is probably a tribute, because there's going to be a lot more still. So, Mark, thanks for joining us on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me, Neal. I am honored to be interviewed. You're calling me a titan, but Neal is a superstar of dermatology, so I'm honored to be interviewed by you.
That's high. That is definitely high praise. I did get to fill in your shoes. We could start on a little bit of psoriasis and work our way through some topics. I did get to fill in your shoes at a meeting where Flight Challenges gave me the PowerPoint, and I got to talk about some psoriasis updates. But it's fortunate because we were doing some of the same trials, and we talk about these new molecules all the time. Can you give us just the rapid fire of some of the new molecules in motion, especially some of the oral treatments that are coming?
I will just say, it's not the first time you've saved me, Neal. You may not remember, but during COVID, there was a virtual grand rounds, I think, and the speaker didn't show up, and we had minutes to go. And I called you, and you gave that lecture with minutes. I mean, you are a person who knows all the dermatology, so it's not the first time. So thank you. A number of exciting new orals in dermatology. I would say the one right now that's getting a lot of attention is icotrokinra, which is an oral IL-23 peptide. And I will tell you that I was offered the opportunity to do that trial in phase 2, and I thought, there's no way this is going to ever work. It's an oral, it's going to get digested just like hamburger is, and it'll never reach the target. But sure enough, it was digested, but 1%, less than 1% got through. But that less than 1% was enough to clear psoriasis. And in their phase 2, they're showing more than 3/4 of patients achieving PASI 75, which is dramatic. For an oral molecule, it beats everything else we have out there. So it's getting a lot of attention. The phase 3 data confirmed phase 2. The 52-week data confirmed that the effect is sustained. And so I think we have a great new oral coming.
It's interesting because we saw the oral TNF. It almost kind of came and went. We saw some other orals that tried to make the pathway, but it seems like this approach of going after 23 might be the winner.
Absolutely. Now, I will say there is a new oral TNF as well, which is a receptor blocker also. It's the R1 receptor of TNF, and they only showed brief, phase week 4 results, but it actually was impressive at week 4. So that may not be a forgotten field. In addition, there's a suggestion that some of the infections and malignancies that have been related in low frequency to TNF blockers may be related to the TNF-R2 receptor. So it's possible that showing a good quick effect with R1 that may make it competitive at 12 weeks, or 16 weeks. So I think there's some promise there. There's also, you probably know, an IL-17 receptor, which was again tested in early phase trials, and it looks like an oral IL-17 will be pursued as well.
That would be great. My concern is that I think the tyrosine kinase inhibitors, all the 3 that are one on the market and 2 coming, they may find their home more with lupus than they will psoriasis, because that data is actually pretty striking.
So their data on psoriasis is among the best data and lupus is among the best data we have. They may yet have a role in psoriasis. I don't know why deucravacitinib has not done better. I use it and the only other new oral, the new orals are much safer than the old ones. Acitretin didn't work that well and caused birth defects. Methotrexate and Cyclosporin have 1 million box warnings that are well deserved. Deucravacitinib has been a breakthrough for us. It is certainly more effective than apremilast, for example. It's also more effective than acitretin. It doesn't have any of the box warnings of methotrexate, cyclosporin, or acitretin. So it offers a pretty good opportunity for us. Not sure why it hasn't done better in the marketplace. And it may simply be timing. I think there is an opportunity for TYK2 inhibitors to succeed in psoriasis. And there's no question that they appear to be breaking ground in lupus and in connective tissue diseases. That may be a real opportunity for them, but I think there still is a good place for them in psoriasis as well.
Yeah. So that kind of segues into the next thought about hedgehog inhibitors, because that's the same vein and the same frustration we have with our colleagues is, why are we not writing more hedgehog inhibitors? And there was a consensus panel you were part of. I've been a part of a few as well. What do we need to do to get our friends into these drugs today? I mean, it's really very interesting.
Yeah. So the reason they're not being used is primarily muscle cramps. And I think the argument to be made here, and this is the way I use them. First of all, I start everyone on L-carnitine, 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams daily. That dramatically delays the onset of muscle cramps, which with sonidegib was a couple of months. And the muscle cramps, by the way, are much less with sonidegib than vismodegib. So, and we actually have switched all our vismodegib patients to sonidegib for that reason. I should actually say I've been a consultant for all the psoriasis companies and also for the makers of sonidegib and vismodegib in the past. Having said that, you can give the drug, have no side effects for many months, shrink the tumor to almost nothing, and then operate on it. And that's what we routinely do here.
Yeah, I think that the neoadjuvant approach to all of this has to just be on the forefront. I think we've kind of forgotten about neoadjuvant, and just like oncologists, you shrink the tumor, cut it out, and keep it away. I mean, that's a mentality that dermatologists need to think about.
We started doing this a while back, where we shrink the tumor and then we have patients operate on it. And then what ended up happening, there were some patients who didn't get the side effects or got minimal side effects, and they decided they don't want surgery at all, and they just continued on the treatment, and they have done incredibly well. So, so there are several ways in which we use it, but I agree with you. The neoadjuvant method, treat first, shrink the tumor, and then operate, is a better way to go with these.
Yeah, and I think part of the lack of uptake comes back to the fact that neither company that promotes the drugs can talk about L-carnitine or staggered 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, or managing any of the expected outcomes, right? I mean, that's where some of the frustration lies.
I think using it neoadjuvant is actually off-label. So they have to rely on us from the podium talking about the best way to use these.
Yeah, no, correct. So I want to bridge from skin cancer to what goes before that, which is photoaging and rejuvenation. And you've gotten involved with a lot of things on the forefront. There's a new molecule or new class of targets of aging cells called the GPX4 modulator, and it works on many different tissues. And it's kind of making its way into dermatology. Tell us a little bit about this initiative.
GPX4, I don't have any direct experience with, but they just have treated their first patient within a phase 1 trial. So GPX4 modulators have a role in a process called ferroptosis, which is similar to apoptosis, and they induce senescent cell death. It turns out senescent cells have a role in stimulating chronic inflammation and fibrosis. So think about all the diseases that we treat where these senescent cells actually have been implicated: psoriasis, atopic dermatitis, vitiligo, alopecia areata, hidradenitis suppurativa, connective tissue diseases like scleroderma. Fibrosis is a prominent plays a prominent role in that. Dermatomyositis as well. And so there is a real place in dermatologic diseases for a molecule that would do that. And there was actually just a Nature Neuroscience paper showing a role for senescent cells in chronic neuropathic pain. The design of the trial is interesting. This has been done before with psoriasis, where instead of doing the phase 1 trial in healthy volunteers, they actually use patients. And so in this phase 1 trial, Rubito, who make this GPX4 modulator, are going to be using patients with inflammatory skin diseases like psoriasis and the diseases we just mentioned, and also will study patients with actinic keratoses and otherwise healthy aging skin. The drawback, of course, of a phase 1 trial is you can only treat patients for 1 month. So we're not going to get 16-week data, but we will get 1 month data, and they're going to look and see, did we indeed impact senescent cells? Did we reduce senescent cells? And I think that there is some real promise there.
And they did some work in vitro too with biopsy specimens and some PK data also, yeah. Which is great. I mean, because immune senescence, I mean, if we're not modulating how much of the immune system is not doing its surveillance job, I mean, we're already going to be behind. And that's where I think we kind of do our work. So this is real exciting. But I think even more so, you think about the future of, talking about aging and, how can we slow some of that process down? I think this is where the forefront will be. So that's great. Well, Mark, I really appreciate your insights on all these important topics, not only what we've done and where we're going, but, keeping research alive. I think you and I and a bunch of our other colleagues really want to put our foot on the gas and not on the brake.
Yep. Yeah, I think, a lot of our friends deserve to be patted on the back. The amount of breakthroughs in dermatology over the last 2 decades has been extraordinary. And there's been a real force of dermatologists contributing to that, you being one of them. So thank you.
Well, without innovation, we'd be lost. So I think that's good. So this was a great episode of our podcast for the practical dermatology. And Dr. Lebwohl, thank you again for taking the time with being with me. And we'll see everyone next time.
All righty. Take care. Bye-bye now. Thanks for having me.
And now for the news. Our top story looks at healthcare disparities affecting patients with atopic dermatitis. New research published in the Journal of Drugs and Dermatology showed that patients living in low-income counties face higher out-of-pocket costs for atopic dermatitis care than high-income counties. The study looked at the comparative costs of commonly purchased skincare items available in major retailers including Amazon, Walmart, Walgreens, CVS, Target, and Meijer. It also specified higher quality products approved by the National Eczema Association and compared them to non-NEA products. According to their analysis, higher quality NEA-approved moisturizing lotions and liquid body soaps cost more than twice as much as popularly purchased alternatives. Lower income areas were also more likely to be pharmacy deserts for these patients. They tended to have fewer retail stores per capita, reduced store operating hours, and reduced in-store product stocks. The research team said the findings underscore the urgent need for targeted policy efforts to improve equity in dermatologic care access. Guselkumab continues to demonstrate its versatility, this time for scalp psoriasis in patients with skin of color. According to new data from the VISIBLE study, first presented at AAD 2024, guselkumab significantly improved scalp psoriasis symptoms across diverse racial and ethnic groups. Nearly 80% of participants in the study reported noticeable scalp clearance by week 24. Patients also saw improvements in a number of secondary endpoints, including DLQI and PSSD scores. The authors emphasized the trial's diverse cohort. Approximately 50% of participants were non-white, calling it an important step toward more inclusive dermatologic research. In the latest edition of Practical Dermatology's C-Suite Chats, Hot.ai founder Anastasia Georgievska talks about the impact of new artificial intelligence tools, such as a virtual skincare try-on that shows customers how sunscreen and its ingredients will impact skin over time, as well as the changes the technology is bringing to the industry. Here is a portion of the feature.
Already have seen multiple examples how AI is leveraged at different steps of the product development and marketing. Essentially, AI now shares some of the traits it did for a pharma company, and essentially it allows companies to discover new molecules or find the new targets for existing molecules on the market, essentially helping strengthen their IP portfolio of the brands. As we know right now, it's extremely hard to launch a brand if you don't have strong IP and proprietary molecules. So AI can make your go-to-market way faster, opposed to not leveraging AI in trying to find your superstar hero molecule.